Chapter 39-35, The Fourth Round of Assessment. Yun Chujio glanced at Zhao Hui. Let's go. Come with me to the number 9 sword forging hall. Zhao Hui was stunned at first, then he was overjoyed. Although he knew a thing or two about hammering the sword blank, it was still very beneficial for him to receive guidance from Hall Master Zhuge. Yun Chujio asked Zhao Hui to call Mu Jiang, and the three of them went to the number 9 sword forging hall. Since the selection was going to start the next day, many disciples tried their best to find connections to get the guidance of a sword forging master. Therefore, many disciples surrounded the gate of the sword forging hall. On the contrary, the number 9 sword forging hall was very quiet. Because those people often ostracized Hall Master Zhuge and the east, west, south, and north, they naturally didn't have the face to come over. Seeing that Yun Chujio brought Zhao Hui and Mu Jiang over, Hall Master Zhuge didn't say anything. Anyway, this sword forging technique would be made public in the future. There was no difference between teaching it now and teaching it in the future. Hall Master Zhuge didn't waste any time. He directly brought the three of them to the weapon refining furnace and had them hammer a sword slab each. When Yun Chujio saw the sword slab, she recalled the days when she was tortured by Jian Feng. Fortunately, she came up with the idea of replacing it with a puppet. Otherwise, she would have been tortured to the point of going crazy. 4 hours later, Mu Jiang and Zhao Hui hammered the sword slab into the shape of a treasure sword. Although it couldn't compare to the 4 of them, it shouldn't be a problem for them to pass the test. On the other hand, Yun Chujio hammered a sword billet into a big pancake. And it was the kind with uneven thickness. Looking at Yun Chujio's big pancake, Hall Master Zhuge's heart suddenly sank. He had said that women could not forge swords at all. This little girl was really unlucky. The 4th round of the selection had turned into a hammering sword billet. It was likely that she would not be able to enter the inner sect. Hall Master Zhuge was about to comment when He Xinjius but fell to the ground. I'm so tired. This is not something that a human can do. Hall Master Zhuge and the others, aren't they human? Besides, when you were beating the sword, you had to rest for a while every now and then. If you weren't thirsty, you would be hot. Even if you were to work diligently, it would not even add up to an hour. Hall Master Zhuge snorted angrily. Yun Chujio, I think you won't be able to pass the 4th round of the assessment. Yun Chujio said indifferently, that may not be the case. Maybe you'll be able to perform better tomorrow. If I get it, you'll be lucky. If I lose, you'll be doomed. I won't force it. Hall Master Zhuge saw that she looked like a dead pig that wasn't afraid of boiling water. He was so angry that he kept twitching. In the end, he sighed. Forget it. If this little girl could not enter the inner sect, he would think of a way to turn her into a sword forging disciple. That way, he would be able to take care of her. Zhao Hui and Mu Jiang were also very worried about Yun Chujio's assessment results. However, they could not help much, so they could only console her with a few dry words. On the 3rd day, the 4th round of the selection officially began. As the assessment was to hammer the sword blanks, the assessment venue was set at the 9 sword forging halls of the lower house. The judges were the hall masters of the sword forging halls of the middle and lower houses. Elder Duanmu and Elder Dongfang of the sword forging hall of the upper house would visit the sword forging halls from time to time. Yun Chujio was assigned to the number 8 sword forging hall. One of the judges was Hall Master Yang of the number 8 sword forging hall. When he saw Yun Chujio, he stroked his goatee. Damn girl, you won't be able to pass the assessment today. Hall Master Yang was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood when he thought of the previous incident. Back then, this damn girl blew up the gate of the number 8 sword forging hall and made him lose face in the commandment hall. Did she want to pass the assessment? No way. Chapter 39-36, Defective Sword Billet. Hall Master Yang glanced at Hall Master Gao, who was acting as the judge with him, and made a subtle gesture. Hall Master Gao was the hall master of the number 8 sword forging hall in the middle court, and he had always had a good relationship with Hall Master Yang. He had often heard Hall Master Yang curse at Yun Chujo, so he naturally understood his intention, so he nodded knowingly. Seeing Hall Master Gao nod, Hall Master Yang felt even more confident. He looked at Yun Chujo again and sneered in his heart. Even if he didn't use any means, this stinky girl wouldn't be able to pass the test. He had heard that this stinky girl had beaten a sword billet into a pancake in the number 9 sword forging hall yesterday. It was impossible for such a thing to pass the test. As there was only one weapon refining furnace, it could only take 8 disciples at a time. Yun Chujo was in the last batch, so she could only watch the disciples beat the sword billet in boredom. As Yun Chujo watched, she cursed in her heart. In order for a sword billet to take initial form, it would take at least 4 hours of beating. And in order for the sword billet to meet the requirements, it would need to be beaten countless times to complete this step. This sword forging was really too torturous. Finally, 4 hours passed, and the first batch of disciples who participated in the assessment stopped hammering. The difference in the final sword billet that the 8 of them presented was still very obvious. Although some of the disciples' hammering was not as outrageous as Yun Chujia's pancake, they were still far from the embryonic form of a treasure sword. They were basically eliminated. After Hall Master Gao and Hall Master Yang gave each of the 8 people's sword billets a grade, the second batch of disciples began the assessment. After the second batch of disciples' assessment ended, it was finally Yun Chujia's turn. A smug look flashed across Hall Master Yang's eyes. He could not wait to see the despair on Yun Chujia's face when she found out that she had failed the assessment. Just thinking about it made him feel very satisfied. Moreover, the piece of sword billet that he had assigned to Yun Chujo had been deliberately tampered with. The iron core in it did not meet the requirement of calcination. Therefore, no matter how hard this wretched girl hammered it, she would not be able to get a good result in the end. Yun Chujo changed from yesterday's leisurely manner and focused on hammering. However, after hammering it a few times, a deep look flashed across her eyes. Back then, she was almost tortured to the point of going crazy by Jian Feng, so she was naturally very familiar with the sword billet. The sound of this sword billet being hammered was obviously not right, which meant that this sword billet did not meet the requirements of the calcination. She instantly understood that she had been tricked. She glanced at Hall Master Yang without batting an eyelid. As expected, she saw a smug look in his eyes. It was likely that he had made someone do something to it. Yun Chujo naturally would not be at a disadvantage. She pointed at her sword billet and said to Hall Master Yang, "Hall Master Yang, my sword billet did not meet the burning requirement, so I request for a new sword billet." Hall Master Yang never expected Yun Chujo to actually see the problem with the sword billet. A hint of panic flashed across his face, but it quickly turned into anger from embarrassment. Nonsense. What do you know? How can an amateur like you see through the problem with the sword blank? I think you're just being unreasonable because you don't know how to hammer the sword blank. Compared to Hall Master Yang's exasperation, Yun Chujo was very calm. She curled the corners of her lips and looked at Hall Master Gao beside her. "Hall Master Gao, why don't you help me check it out?" Hall Master Gao didn't expect Yun Chujo to make such a request. Although he intended to turn a blind eye to Hall Master Yang's actions, what should he do when the fire burned him? Chapter 39-37, Just wait to be eliminated. Hall Master Yang also looked at Hall Master Gao. He didn't say anything. He believed that Hall Master Gao would definitely choose him between him and Yun Chujo. Sure enough, Hall Master Gao hesitated for a moment, then, he said, "Yun Chujo, these sword carvings were all inspected by Hall Master Yang and his disciples. How could there be a problem? You'd better continue hammering. Don't waste the time of the assessment." When Hall Master Yang heard Hall Master Gao's words, the smug look in his eyes became even stronger. He said mockingly, "Yun Chujo, did you hear that? If you don't know how to hammer the sword billets, then you should just quit. Don't make trouble here without reason. Otherwise, it will affect the other disciples who are participating in the assessment." As expected, the other 7 disciples who were participating in the assessment all looked at Yun Chujo with dissatisfaction. Someone said, "Yun Chujo, if you don't want to participate in the assessment, then scram as soon as possible. That's right. Are Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao inferior to you? Just shut up. What a troublemaker. Seeing this, Hall Master Yang couldn't hide the pride on his face. How could a girl with no foundation want to fight with him? Just wait for elimination. At this moment, the sound of footsteps came from outside the door. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound and saw Elder Duanmu walking in with 2 disciples. It turned out that Elder Duanmu had just arrived at the number 8 sword forging hall when he heard the noise inside and walked in. Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao's faces instantly stiffened. They were afraid that Yun Chuzhou would spill the beans. Elder Duanmu was the hall master of the number 1 sword forging hall in the upper house and had extremely high attainments in sword forging. He knew that there was something wrong with the sword billet at a glance. What they were afraid of came true. Before they could greet Elder Duanmu, they heard Yun Chuzhou say clearly, "Elder Duanmu, you came at the right time. This sword slab of mine doesn't meet the forging requirements, but Hall Master Yang hasn't given it to me yet. What do you think we should do?" Fine beads of sweat instantly appeared on Hall Master Yang's forehead. He wanted to explain, but he didn't know where to begin. He couldn't possibly lie in front of Elder Duanmu, right? Wouldn't that be asking for humiliation? It was over. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have done anything. After all, that trash Yun Chuzhou wouldn't have been able to succeed. He was so regretful that his intestines had turned green. Hall Master Gao felt as if he had been bemoaned in his heart. He was the one who had been undeserved. He had been dragged into this mess all of a sudden. He was simply extremely unlucky. Just as the 2 of them were desperately trying to come up with excuses, Elder Duanmu said in a deep voice, since Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao both said that there was no problem with the sword billet, there is naturally no problem. Yun Chuzhou, don't cause any more trouble, or else I will disqualify you from the assessment. When Yun Chuzhou heard this, she really wanted to smash that sword billet into Elder Duanmu's old face. She finally understood that this old thing was not a good person either. She knew that if she continued to pester him, she would definitely be the one to suffer a loss. Thus, she obediently said, "I know my mistake." After Yun Chuzhou finished speaking, she raised her sledgehammer and began to hammer the sword blanks. Elder Duanmu saw a flash of displeasure in Yun Chuzhou's eyes. He turned his head and glanced at Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao. His eyes were full of warning. It was obvious that he had seen through their little tricks. Hall Master Yang did not expect Elder Duanmu to actually show mercy. He was extremely grateful, but he could not say anything more. He forced a smile and sent Elder Duanmu out of the number 8 sword forging hall. However, when he turned around and returned, his face instantly turned into a mocking expression. "Yun Chuzhou, did you hear that? I advise you not to have any devious ideas. Just wait to be eliminated." Chapter 39-38, 5 points. Yun Chuzhou looked at him mockingly but didn't say anything. Soon, he would know that even if he were to give her a sword slab that didn't meet the forging requirements, she would still be able to pass the assessment. Hall Master Yang saw that after Yun Chuzhou glanced at him, she obediently hammered the sword slab and sneered in his heart. "Idiot! No matter how hard you hammered, this sword slab wouldn't meet the assessment requirements. Just wait for it to be eliminated." Yun Chuzhou's early hammering was very smooth, but when it came to the part close to the iron core, it stopped. Because the iron core did not meet the forging requirements, even with the high temperature of the weapon refining furnace, the hardness was very high. It was impossible to form it by just hammering alone. Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao naturally knew all this. The 2 of them looked at each other. Not to mention Yun Chuzhou, even if they personally went on stage, they would not be able to complete it. Yun Chuzhou's elimination was already a foregone conclusion. However, they discovered that Yun Chuzhou didn't give up. Instead, she used a pair of long pincers to pick up the sword billet and placed it in the crafting furnace to roast it. She probably wanted to roast the sword billet to the extent that it could be beaten. Hall Master Yang pursed his lips. How naive. In order for that sword billet to meet the requirements, it would need to be calcined for at least 4 hours. At that time, even the daylily would be cold. He stared at Yun Chuzhou for a while more. After that, he was too lazy to look because he was certain that Yun Chuzhou definitely wouldn't be able to complete the examination. Thus, he and Hall Master Gao sat at the side and began to drink tea and chat, no longer paying attention to the situation at the weapon refining furnace. Yun Chujia's eyes flashed with a faint light. She saw that Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao were no longer paying attention to her, while the other disciples were all paying attention to their respective sword billets, so she secretly released a small flame. The small flame and the weapon refining furnace's earth fire had the same color. If it wasn't for someone who was intentionally keeping an eye on it, they wouldn't have noticed it. The earth flame could not make the sword billet meet the requirements in a short period of time, but as a small flame of the 10,000-year-old fire marrow, it was not a problem at all. In just a few seconds, the small flame had completed the task. This was a piece of cake for it. Yun Chuzhou took the opportunity to take the sword billet and quietly put the small flame back into her right palm. Then, she continued to hammer the sword billet. When the test was about to end, Hall Master Yang casually glanced at the 8 people who were participating in the test. When he saw the sword billet that Yun Chuzhou was hammering, the teacup in his hand immediately fell to the ground and shattered. No, this was impossible. There was clearly something wrong with Yun Chujia's sword billet. How could she have hammered a sword billet that met the requirements? Hall Master Gao was also very shocked. Not only did the sword billet that Yun Chuzhou was hammering met the requirements, but it was also clear that the result was very good. How was this possible? While the two of them were stunned, the time for the assessment had come. All the disciples put down the tools in their hands and nervously waited for Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao's assessment. Hall Master Yang's expression was very ugly. If Yun Chuzhou was allowed to pass the assessment, wouldn't it be a futile effort? He absolutely could not allow her to pass the test. He glanced at Hall Master Gao who was beside him. Hall Master Gao had already been dragged into the water, so he could only nod his head helplessly. The two of them began to grade the sword billets of the disciples. When it was Yun Chujia's turn, the full score was 10, but Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao only gave Yun Chuzhou 5 points. Yun Chuzhou was so angry that she was amused. There was no one else who was so blind as the judge. The disciples who participated in the assessment were also very surprised. The sword parcels forged by Yun Chuzhou were better in shape and smoothness than the other 7 people, so why did they only give her 5 points? Chapter 39:39. Don't even think about entering the inner sect for the rest of your life. Hall Master Yang gave a signal to his disciples. Those disciples immediately mixed all the sword billets together. This way, Yun Chuzhou would have no evidence even if she wanted to argue. As for those disciples who participated in the assessment together, they would naturally not be stupid enough to go against Hall Master Yang. Therefore, Yun Chuzhou could only suffer in silence. Hall Master Yang looked at Yun Chuzhou with a smug expression. Yun Chuzhou, I told you that you wouldn't pass the assessment. Now you finally believe me, right? Although Zhuge Zhongyuan was a little useless, he still knew how to beat the sword billet. You should go back and learn from him. Otherwise, you probably won't be able to enter the inner sect for the rest of your life. Yun Chuzhou watched his performance with a cold gaze. She said indifferently, Hall Master Yang, be a man and leave a line. It will be easier for us to meet in the future. Don't go too far. If you are willing to give me justice now, I will pretend that what happened before did not happen. Otherwise, you will regret it. Hall Master Yang threw his head back and laughed loudly. You, a mere outer sect disciple, actually dare to threaten me? Your sword billet is only worth 5 points. What are you not convinced about? Hall Master Yang had nothing to be afraid of. No matter who this darn girl looked for to make a decision for her, the sword billet had already been mixed together. If he casually took out an unqualified sword billet and said it was hers, what could she do? The other disciples who participated in the assessment had some gloating, some sympathetic and some indifferent. However, no one came out to speak up for Yun Chujio, because no one wanted to get into trouble because of an insignificant person. Yun Chujio chuckled. Hall Master Gao, what do you say? Hall Master Gao's face was a little stiff, but since he had already done what he had to do, he was naturally not stupid enough to slap his own face. So he said coldly, Yun Chujio, go back and practice well. There will be another chance next year. Yun Chujio sneered in her heart. It was easy for her to say that. Next year. Could it be that just because they were taking revenge for personal reasons, she would have to spend a year of her time with them? Today, she would definitely seek justice. She took out a few sudden rupture talismans and suddenly threw them onto the gate of the number 8 sword forging hall. Boom! Boom! After a few loud bangs, the gate of the number 8 sword forging hall turned into a pile of slag. Everyone was stunned by this unexpected turn of events. Was this Yun Chujio crazy because she was eliminated? What was she trying to do? Was she trying to rebel? Hall Master Yang was shocked, then he roared in anger out of embarrassment, Yun Chujio, you publicly destroyed the items of the sect, just wait to be punished. A good-for-nothing like you and a troublemaker like you can forget about entering the inner sect for the rest of your life. Yun Chujio smiled brightly, for the rest of your life? You're right, if you were to die now, wouldn't you have never seen me enter the inner sect for the rest of your life? Hall Master Yang was so angry that he nearly vomited blood. This smelly girl's words were too insidious. Before he could say anything else, many people ran towards the number 8 sword forging hall. What a joke! With such a huge commotion, it was hard not to attract attention. The first to arrive were Elder Duanmu and Elder Dongfang. The two were responsible for patrolling the sword forging hall, so when they heard the commotion, they were the first to rush over. The two of them were dumbfounded when they saw the debris on the ground. They had heard of pill refining furnaces exploding, but why did the number 8 sword forging hall's weapon refining furnace also explode? Hall Master Yang saw the two of them and walked up to them with an indignant expression. Elders, Yun Chujio actually used a talisman to blow up the gate of our number 8 sword forging hall because she didn't pass the assessment. What audacity! Chapter 39-40, the two blind judges. The disciples of the number 8 sword forging hall also agreed to testify. Their faces were full of anger, as if they wished they could strangle Yun Chujio to death. They were all disciples of the number 8 sword forging hall. Wasn't blowing up their doors a slap to their faces? And they had already been slapped once before, and now they were doing it again. This was intolerable. Elder Duanmu looked at Yun Chujio and asked coldly, Yun Chujio, what do you think? Yun Chujio said very calmly, that's right, I was the one who blew up this door. However, I wasn't venting my anger because I didn't pass the assessment. I just wanted to make some noise so that everyone could come over and see if Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao were blind. The sword billet that I beat could at least score 8 out of 10 points, but the two of them who were blind actually only gave me 5 points. The inner sect selection is such an important test, but they actually arranged for 2 blind judges. This isn't very good, is it? Elder Duanmu's expression immediately darkened. Yun Chujio, no matter what the reason is, you shouldn't damage the sect's property. It's my fault for damaging the property. The sect will punish me according to the sect's rules. But, I can't be at a disadvantage, right? I can't possibly miss the opportunity to meet 2 blind judges, right? Yun Chujio's expression was still very calm, there wasn't a trace of panic. What evidence do you have to prove that Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao deliberately lowered your score? Elder Duanmu's tone was very gloomy, and it was obvious that he was a little impatient. He didn't believe Yun Chujio's words at all because he knew that there was something wrong with Yun Chujio's sword billet. How could she succeed in punching it? Moreover, because he had a good relationship with Elder Wan, he naturally did not like Yun Chujio. When Yun Chujio heard Elder Duanmu's words, she pointed at the disciples who were taking the test together and said, they all saw it. Can you honestly say that the sword slab I punched is only worth 5 points? Hall Master Yang almost laughed out loud when he heard Yun Chujio's question. This Yun Chujo was simply too stupid. The disciples who participated in the assessment would only help her testify if they were stupid. As expected, none of the disciples spoke up. On the contrary, a few disciples who were usually on good terms with the number 8 sword forging hall disciples said, Elder Duanmu, Yun Chujo is simply spouting nonsense. She hammered the sword billet until it was uneven and irregular in shape. I think 5 points is a little too much. Exactly. Who doesn't know that she beat a big pancake in the number 9 sword forging hall yesterday? It's already beyond her standard to get 5 points today. Yes, I can also prove that Yun Chujo is talking nonsense. She blew up the gate of the number 8 sword forging hall just to vent her anger. Now, she's framing Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao. Please punish her severely, elders. Elder Dongfang didn't say anything. He hoped that Yun Chujo would be able to enter the inner sect, and he also planned to do her a favor. After all, this old man was still thinking about the earth fire of the King-tier fire spirit beast. However, he had to wait for the right time to do her a favor. Now that the situation was still unclear, he naturally couldn't express his attitude. He was prepared to wait for the situation to develop before making a sound. He could not help but frown when he saw the situation. He had heard that Yun Chujo was very smart. Why was she so stupid today? No matter what the truth was, how could these disciples speak up for her? It seemed that she was destined to be punished today. The only thing he could do was to help plead for her. At this moment, many people gathered. Manager Song from the discipline hall was also among them. He saw a pile of debris on the ground and then looked at Yun Chujo in the middle of the crowd. He thought to himself, well, this person has stirred up trouble again. The only person who could stir up a lot of trouble just by participating in an assessment was this troublemaker. Chapter 3941 was destroyed by itself. Elder Duanmu let out a long cough. The disciples who were excited shut their mouths and gloated at Yun Chujo. Yun Chujo, now that the truth has been revealed, what else do you have to say? Manager Song, Yun Chujo destroyed the gate of the number 8 sword forging hall because she was venting her anger. Take her to the discipline hall and punish her according to the sect rules. Elder Duanmu said to Manager Song. Manager Song naturally couldn't say anything. He was about to signal his subordinates to take Yun Chujo away. Elder Dongfang said, this little girl is still young. It's inevitable that she does things without thinking. Moreover, in a few days, Yun Chujo will be going to collect the earth fire of the king-level fire spirit beast, so she should be dealt with leniently. Manager Song naturally couldn't ask for more. He immediately nodded and signaled his subordinates to take Yun Chujo away. At this moment, Yun Chujo clapped her hands and said with a smile, I've learned a lot today. Sometimes, black and white can really be reversed. However, I still have evidence. The two elders will know if what I said is true after checking my sword billet. Once Yun Chujo's words left his mouth, Hall Master Yang felt that he was too wise. Now that all the sword billets were mixed together, he could take any one of them. Thus, he said to his disciple, since she doesn't want to give up, bring her sword billet over and let the two elders have a look. The disciple naturally understood and picked out a rough and uneven sword billet from the pile of sword billets. When Elder Dongfang saw the sword billet, he couldn't help but frown. This sword billet was already too much for 5 points. If he had given 4 points at most, that would have been too bad. Just when everyone thought that the matter was settled, the corners of Yun Chujo's lips curled up. That sword slab is not mine. Hall Master Yang immediately said with a stern expression, Yun Chujo, don't lie through your teeth. This sword slab is yours. Don't you think so? Immediately, a few disciples who were participating in the assessment echoed, it's this one. Only she can beat the sword slab to such a state. It's simply too embarrassing. Yes, I can also prove that this sword billet belongs to Yun Chujo. Hall Master Yang looked at Yun Chujo with a face full of ridicule. This damned girl, she still wants to fight with him. Dream on. Yun Chujo did not reply. Instead, she walked to the tool that placed the sword billet. She pointed at a sword billet and said, "This sword billet belongs to me." Hall Master Yang vaguely looked at a disciple who was participating in the assessment. That disciple immediately said, "Yun Chujiu, you're too shameless. This sword billet clearly belongs to me." Yun Chujiu still had a faint smile on her face as she said to Elder Dongfang, "Elder Dongfang, please take a look at this sword billet. When I was hammering, I specially hammered a cloud mark on the sword billet in order to mark it." The fake disciple from before immediately panicked. He gritted his teeth and said, "Yun Chujiu, you are really shameless. That cloud was clearly caused by me carelessly when I was hammering. How did it become your mark?" Yun Chujiu's face revealed a trace of panic. You're talking nonsense. I was clearly the one who made the mark." When that disciple saw the situation, he was even more certain that the cloud mark was made by him. Suddenly, Yun Chujiu smiled. Her smile was very bright. She used a pair of pincers to pick up the sword slab for everyone to see. The surface was smooth. Where was the cloud? Everyone was stunned at first, and then they realized that Yun Chujiu had said that on purpose to let the disciple give herself away. Now, the lie had been exposed. Chapter 3942, Hammer a New Sword Slab. Hall Master Yang glared at the impostor disciple. Idiot. He was so easily exposed by Yun Chujiu. A trace of treachery flashed in his eyes as he snorted, "Although it can prove that this sword slab was not struck by him, it cannot prove that it was struck by you, Yun Chujiu." Hearing this, everyone felt that what Hall Master Yang said made sense. Yun Chujiu had just used a small trick, which could not prove that this sword slab was struck by her at all. Yun Chujiu's gaze suddenly turned sharp. "Since Hall Master Yang's thinking is so meticulous, why did you let people mix all the sword slabs together? What are your intentions?" Hall Master Yang was shocked by Yun Chujiu's sharp gaze and aggressive words and took a step back. Just as he was about to refute, Yun Chujiu said to Elder Duanmu and Elder Dongfang, "I am willing to strike a new sword slab in front of the two elders." This disciple is willing to hammer a new sword slab in front of the two elders. If it doesn't reach 80% or above, this disciple has nothing to say. If it can reach 80%, I hope that the two elders can make a decision for this disciple. When everyone heard Yun Chujiu's words, they immediately started discussing. Is this Yun Chujiu crazy? She has already hammered for 4 hours, how can she still have the stamina and spirit energy to hammer a new sword slab? That's right, and it has to be above 80%. Isn't this too difficult? This Yun Chujiu is really smart and muddle-headed. She might as well bite the sword billet to death and let it belong to her. Perhaps she still has a chance of winning. Elder Dongfang frowned. If she was an official disciple of the sword forging hall, she could still hammer 2 sword billets in a row, but she could not guarantee the quality of the second sword billet. Moreover, this Yun Chujiu was just a newbie. Wasn't she trying to make things difficult for him? Just as he was about to speak up to stop her, Elder Duanmu said coldly, "All right, I'll agree to it. You may begin." Elder Dongfang laughed bitterly. Well, it was too late for him to stop her now. Hall Master Yang immediately ordered someone to take out a sword billet from the furnace that had not been struck by the hammer for Yun Chujiu's assessment. A cold smile appeared on his face. This Yun Chujiu was really courting death. Yun Chujiu did not immediately start punching. Instead, she closed her eyes to calm herself down. A moment later, she picked up the sledgehammer and started punching the sword slab. When Elder Dongfang saw Yun Chujiu's actions, his originally furrowed brows could not help but relax a little. The strength of this little girl's punching was just right. As long as she could maintain this strength, she should be able to punch out more than 80% of the sword slab. However, could she maintain this force all the time? Very quickly, 2 hours passed. Yun Chujiu's force was still the same as before. Only, fine beads of sweat started to seep out from her forehead. Another hour passed, and the sword billet had already taken shape. However, From Yun Chujia's tightly biting lips and slightly trembling legs, it could be seen that she had already reached the limits of her body. After all, every swing of the hammer required a lot of spirit energy and physical strength. Elder Dongfang shook his head slightly. This little girl would probably not be able to hold on until the end. She was already at the end of her rope. Hall Master Yang's originally somewhat nervous mood immediately relaxed. He was certain that Yun Chuzhou would at most hold on for another 15 minutes before she would definitely collapse to the ground. Although this little girl was very torturous, she would only be eliminated in the end. Everyone's guess was right. Yun Chujia's physical strength and spiritual power were already on the verge of collapse. Chapter 39:43 Toughness. Yun Chuzhou smiled bitterly in her heart. She had really overestimated herself. She had to continuously hammer the sword billet without any time to catch her breath. She needed sufficient physical strength and spiritual power to support herself. Moreover, she had already expended a lot of physical strength and spiritual power during the previous assessment. Now, she really couldn't hold on any longer. Yun Chuzhou gritted her teeth. If she wanted to enter the inner sect, she had to complete this sword billet. Otherwise, Elder Duanmu and the others would definitely find all sorts of reasons to eliminate her. Although this fellow was usually careless, he still had a fierce will at the critical moment. She bit her lips tightly and continued to maintain her original strength, hammering the sword billet repeatedly. The fine beads of sweat on Yun Chujia's forehead quickly turned into bean-sized beads of sweat. Her legs trembled even more violently, and her lips were even bleeding from her bites. However, Yun Chujia's movements were not affected at all. She continued to pound the sword billet with the same force. The expressions of some of the disciples who participated in the assessment gradually changed. Their originally indifferent expressions became complicated. They had to admit that Yun Chujia's persistence had touched them. They even felt a little guilty for their indifference just now. If they had helped Yun Chuzhou to testify, Yun Chuzhou would not have needed to pound the sword billet a second time. Were they wrong? Elder Duanmu's expression also changed slightly. In Elder Wan's description, Yun Chuzhou was a good-for-nothing who took advantage of opportunities and caused trouble. However, the Yun Chuzhou he saw now was a little girl with a strong will. He had come from an ordinary sword-forging disciple and had hammered countless sword billets in his lifetime. He knew Yun Chujia's current physical condition too well. She had already reached the limits of her body, she was merely relying on her willpower to hold on. Elder Dongfang looked at Yun Chuzhou with admiration. Regardless of whether she had passed the assessment or not, he was optimistic about this little girl's future. With such tenacity, there was probably no difficulty that could make her shrink back. Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao's faces turned slightly pale. However, they consoled themselves that even if Yun Chuzhou had completed the sword blanks, it could not prove that they were the ones who had lowered the score. As long as they insisted that Yun Chuzhou made a mistake the first time, it was not because they had lowered the score, and she would not be able to do anything to them. For a moment, in the number 8 sword forging hall, only the sounds of Yun Chuzhou beating the billet could be heard. Everyone's hearts seemed to be beating along with the sounds of beating. Could Yun Chuzhou hold on until the end? Finally, 4 hours had passed. Everyone's gaze fell on the sword billet. It was a sword billet that no one could find any flaws in. It was so perfect that they did not even need to hammer it again before they could proceed to the next step. Yun Chuzhou collapsed onto the ground, exhausted. She panted heavily, but her eyes were dazzling. She had done it. Elder Dongfang gave Yun Chuzhou a look of approval and turned to look at Elder Duanmu. The sword billet that Yun Chuzhou hammered is perfect. It's not even worth 10 points. What do you think, Elder Duanmu? Elder Duanmu nodded. Not bad. This sword slab is indeed worth 10 points. Elder Dongfang smiled and said, in that case, Yun Chuzhou, congratulations. You have passed the 4th round of the selection. Yun Chuzhou revealed a faint smile on her face. However, she looked at the pale-faced Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao and said indifferently, thank you, elders. I wonder how these two blind judges will be dealt with. Chapter 3944. The dust has settled. As soon as Yun Chuzhou finished speaking, Hall Master Yang immediately stomped his feet and said, Yun Chuzhou, although you succeeded the second time, this doesn't mean that you succeeded the first time as well. Do you have any evidence to prove that we have lowered your score? Elder Dongfang sighed in his heart. That's right. Although he completely believed Yun Chuzhou's words, without concrete evidence, there was no way to punish these two people. This time, the little girl could only suffer in silence. However, it was fortunate that she was still quick-witted enough to blow up the main gate here and lure him over. Otherwise, she might have lost her inner sect qualification as well. Yun Chuzhou revealed a mocking smile. Just as she was about to speak, a disciple who was participating in the assessment said in a somewhat nervous but firm tone, I can prove on behalf of Yun Chuzhou that she was the one who hammered the sword slab before. With this disciple taking the lead, someone stepped forward one after another. I can also prove that the sword slab that Yun Chuzhou hammered the first time was the same one from before. That's right. When I first saw the sword slab of such good quality being hammered to 5 points, I was quite surprised. After all, it should be worth at least 8 points. This unexpected turn of events not only shocked Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao, even Yun Chuzhou was dumbfounded. Weren't these people indifferent before? Why did they suddenly speak up for her? What on earth happened? Hall Master Yang's face turned red as he shouted, Nonsense! Nonsense! These people must be Yun Chuzhou's best friends, that's why they spoke up for her. Two elders, this is a complete slander. Elder Duanmu shouted coldly, Enough. Initially, I didn't want to pursue the matter on account of your usual diligence, but now that it has come to this point, I didn't expect you to still have no intention of repentance. Manager Song, I'll leave these two people to you. Just deal with them according to the sect rules. There's no need to worry about their status as the Hall Master of the Sword Forging Hall. When Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao heard Elder Duanmu's last words, their faces turned as pale as paper. Elder Duanmu was planning to strip them of their Hall Master positions. They usually relied on their status as the Hall Master of the Sword Forging Hall to run amok. If they didn't have this status, they would be completely finished. Hall Master Gao immediately said with a pale face, Elders, I was forced by Hall Master Yang. I'm at most an accomplice. This was Hall Master Yang's idea. Spare me this time. When Hall Master Yang saw Hall Master Gao say this, he immediately said in exasperation, You're talking nonsense. This was clearly your idea. I was forced by you. The argument between the two became more and more intense. They were even about to fight. Elder Duanmu couldn't be bothered to watch the two of them bicker. He signaled Manager Song to escort the two away. Elder Duanmu swept his gaze over the disciples who were participating in the assessment. Then, he said to the disciples behind him, Those disciples who committed perjury just now will be demoted to odd job workers. They are not allowed to be transferred to outer sect disciples for the next 3 years. Immediately, those disciples who committed perjury fell to the ground one by one, wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves. They were simply regretting their actions. Yun Chuzhou was a little dumbfounded. Didn't this old man Duanmu always find fault with her? Why did he suddenly become enlightened? Was he possessed by a ghost? Before Yun Chuzhou could figure it out, Elder Duanmu had already left with his people. Elder Dongfang walked in front of her and said with a smile, Little girl, not bad. Cultivate well in the inner sect and strive to become a true disciple as soon as possible. Yun Chuzhou thanked him obediently before Elder Dongfang left with his men. Chapter 3945 entered the inner sect. Yun Chuzhou was about to thank the disciples who had helped her testify, but they all left with embarrassed expressions. Yun Chuzhou shrugged her shoulders and also left the number 8 sword forging hall. At this time, the sky had completely darkened. She walked not far away and saw Zhao Hui, Zhang Li, and Mu Jiang who were looking in her direction. The three of them had successfully passed the fourth round of the selection. They originally wanted to enter the number 8 sword forging hall, but they were chased away by the disciples of the discipline hall, so they could only wait here for the news. Yun Chujo briefly told them what had happened. After separating from them, she returned to her own courtyard. She pushed open the courtyard door and saw balls of red murderous aura bouncing around in the courtyard. It was not until Yun Chujo took out the Saraira that she drifted away. Yun Chujo gritted her teeth. She could move out tomorrow anyway. Otherwise, she would have to think of a way to teach them a lesson. During dinner, Di Baiming asked Yun Chujo, if those disciples don't come out to testify for you, how do you plan to prove that Hall Master Yang and Hall Master Gao deliberately lowered your score? Yun Chujo spread her hands, I really don't have any other way. Anyway, I have already obtained the qualification to advance to the inner sect. I can only suffer this loss for the time being. However, as you know, Prince Charming, I'm a person who eats everything, but I won't suffer any losses. After the rumors die down, I'll block all their underground fire pipes and spread rumors, saying that they did something immoral and got their retribution. Then, from time to time, I'll get the Meng Yan show to weave nightmares for them. I guarantee that I'll torture them until they become mentally ill. Di Baiming, it seemed that the two of them should be glad that they were punished. Otherwise, the little rascal would really be able to do it. Yun Chujo sighed. However, after this incident, it did remind me that I still have to be more careful in the future. If I had made a mark when I was hammering the sword, I wouldn't have been so passive. Di Baiming said with some confusion, if you had really made a cloud mark and that disciple said that you had seen it, wouldn't you be at a loss for words? Yun Chujo looked at a certain deity as if she was looking at a little fool. If I had really made a cloud mark, I would have told everyone that I had carved a 9 character on it. That fool would have insisted that it was a 9 character. Then, I would have said that it was a cloud mark and that would have been the end of it. Di Baiming, alright, just pretend that he didn't say anything. The next morning, Yun Chujo woke up early in the morning, which was a rare occasion. This was because all the inner sect disciples had to accept Master Ouyang's lecture at the appointed time. It could also be considered as a ceremony to enter the inner sect. Yun Chujo had a simple breakfast and hopped to the square in the middle courtyard. Only inner sect disciples were qualified to live and cultivate in the middle courtyard. The spiritual energy in the middle courtyard was much denser than in the lower courtyard, and the treatment of inner sect disciples was hundreds of times better than that of outer sect disciples. That was why outer sect disciples were so eager to enter the inner sect. Out of the tens of thousands of outer sect disciples who participated in the inner sect selection, only 50 were chosen to enter the inner sect. It could be seen how intense the competition was. When Zhao Hui saw Yun Chujo, he came over with a face full of excitement. He was able to enter the inner sect this time largely because he had borrowed Yun Chuji's light. He was naturally very grateful in his heart. The two of them had barely spoken a few words when Master Ouyang and the elders arrived, and everyone instantly quieted down. Master Ouyang gave a speech, and it was nothing more than hoping that they would cultivate properly in the future. He Xinjiu was drowsy after listening to it, so bored. Logo, this is the end of part 1, and Chapter 3946 would be this one. After Master Ouyang's long speech, he left with the higher-ups of the sect. Yun Chujo originally thought that she could disband them, but she didn't expect Elder Leng, who was in charge of all the affairs of the central courtyard, to make a ruckus again. It was nothing more than that they were now inner disciples and would be the mainstay of the sect in the future, therefore, she had to cultivate properly and not break the sect rules. She didn't know if it was He Xinjia's misconception, but she felt that Elder Leng looked at her a few times when he said not to break the sect rules. This guy cursed her in his heart. Why did he look at her? She had always been obedient, alright? After Elder Leng kissed her for a while, he finally said, alright, you can go to the General Affairs Hall in the middle courtyard now to get the new clothes and materials of the sect. Everyone immediately rushed to the Hall of Affairs in the middle courtyard, because only by changing into the clothes that symbolized the inner disciples could they be more elegant. Yun Chujo and Zhao Hui also followed everyone to the Hall of Affairs in the middle courtyard. There were already arrangements in there, and they methodically distributed the sex resources and arranged the dormitories for everyone. When it was Yun Chujia's turn, Yun Chujio glanced at the notice board and finally chose a remote courtyard. She had no choice, as she had too many secrets, so it was more convenient for her to live further away from everyone. The disciple in charge of registering the courtyard looked at Yun Chujio in surprise and then said, "Junior sister Yun, the location of this courtyard is not very good. The spiritual power is very thin, and it can't even compare to the dormitory of the outer courtyard. Are you sure you want to choose this one?" Yun Chujio nodded. "It's okay. I like the quiet, so I'll choose this one." The disciple shook his head and helped Yun Chujio to complete the procedures. Zhao Hui wanted to say something, but when he thought about how Yun Chujio had even stayed in a haunted house, it was not that strange to choose this courtyard. After leaving the miscellaneous affairs hall, Zhang Li's identity jade token started to tremble. After his spiritual sense entered, his expression became slightly excited. He said to Yun Chujio, "Martial nephew Yun, master asked me to go over. I'll be leaving first." Yun Chujio wasn't too surprised. When sect leader Ouyang was speaking, he had looked at Zhang Li several times. He must have called him over to give him a few words of encouragement. After Zhang Li left, Yun Chujio and Zhao Hui followed a group of newly promoted inner sect disciples to the dormitory area. However, just as they reached the entrance of the dormitory area, they were blocked by some people. Yun Chujio frowned. Were they planning to bully their new disciples? This scene seemed familiar. However, Yun Chujio soon realized that her guess was wrong. The old disciples who blocked the way did not bully the new disciples. Instead, they each took a new disciple with them. They said that they were going to help them introduce the inner sect. Yun Chujio blinked her eyes. Oh my, this inner disciple's quality was indeed much higher than that of the outer disciples. However, she judged a gentleman with a mean heart. Soon, a short and fat man walked up to Yun Chujio and said, "This is junior sister Yun, right? I have heard a lot about you. I am Qin Bufan." Yun Chujio sized up Qin Bufan and thought to herself, "I don't see anything special about him." However, she didn't want to hit the smiling person. She nodded slightly and said, "Greetings, senior brother Qin. What can I do for you?" "Junior sister Yun, you have just entered the inner sect, so you must be unfamiliar with many things. Senior brother is considered an old man in the inner sect. Let me introduce you. Why don't we go to junior sister's courtyard first?" Qin Bufan said with a smile. Chapter 3947 Always spoke with fists. Yun Chujio always felt that Qin Bufan's smile was a bit fake. However, she felt that it was not a bad thing to know more about the inner sect. Therefore, she nodded and said, "Thank you, senior brother Qin." Qin Bufan said a few polite words and followed Yun Chujio into the dormitory area. As they walked, he introduced the inner sect situation. However, seeing that they were almost out of the dormitory area, Yun Chujio had no intention of stopping. Qin Bufan asked in confusion, "Junior sister Yun, are we still not in your dormitory?" Yun Chujio pointed at a small black dot in the distance. "There, that is my courtyard." Xiao He said. Qin Bufan staggered, then, he revealed a look of righteous indignation. "Junior sister Yun, it must be those bastards from the miscellaneous affairs hall who set you up. That courtyard is not only very remote, but it also has thin spiritual qi. It is not a place for people to live." Yun Chujio smiled. "Senior brother Qin, you misunderstood. I chose it myself. I like the peace and quiet, so I chose that place. If senior brother Qin thinks that it is too far, then I will not trouble you. I will ask for your advice another day." Qin Bufan hesitated for a moment, then said with a smile, "Junior sister Yun, you must be joking. This is not much of a journey. Let's go." Yun Chujio narrowed her eyes and thought, what is this Qin Bufan trying to do? The two of them chatted as they walked and finally arrived at Yun Chujio's new dormitory. After Yun Chuzhou opened the door with her identity jade token, she found that the yard was full of weeds. Apparently, it had been abandoned for a long time. Senior brother Chen, I don't think my yard can entertain you, so please go back. Yun Chuzhou said apologetically. A hint of scheming flashed across Chen Bufan's small eyes. He put on a fake smile and said, Junior sister Yun, I've explained the whole journey to you. You can't possibly let me leave empty-handed, right? Yun Chuzhou looked at him with interest and said, what do you mean by that? I don't quite understand. Chen Bufan pursed his lips. I'm not greedy. Didn't you just get the resources from the sect? Just give me the bottle of 9 transformation spirit gathering pill as a reward. What if I don't give it to you? Yun Chuzhou smiled. She thought that the inner disciples had a high level of awareness, but it turned out that they had changed to a more subtle trick. Chen Bufan sneered. You don't want to give it to me? Junior sister Yun, do you know why I have to follow you to the dormitory? Even if I beat you until you cry for your mother and father, no one will report you. And even if you did, there would be no witnesses, so you could only suffer in silence. Therefore, I advise you to be sensible, or else you will suffer. Yun Chuzhou looked at him as if he was an idiot. Senior brother Chen, don't you know that I have spirit beasts? Don't you know that I have many giant winged birds? Aren't you afraid that I will beat you up instead? Chen Bufan was stunned at first, then he laughed out loud. Yun Chuzhou, I heard that you are very smart, but now it seems that you are just an idiot. Putting aside whether you can beat me up or not, even if you can beat me up, do you dare to beat me up? You are just a new disciple and you are going against an old disciple like me. Do you still want to stay in the inner sect? Yes. Yun Chuzhou curled her lips. Senior brother Chen, you might have made a mistake. I've never thought of staying in the inner sect. I've always spoken with my fists. It's one of my rules to not bicker when you can fight. Chapter 3948, Stay behind to pull the weeds. Yun Chuzhou, I advise you to be sensible. This is the middle court, not the lower court where you can do whatever you want. Chen Bufan threatened. Chen Bufan did not expect Yun Chuzhou to be so arrogant. He had heard some rumors about Yun Chuzhou, but he thought that Yun Chuzhou was just a small outer court disciple, so he did not pay too much attention to her. Besides, he felt that the rumors were all exaggerated. The rumors about beating Wan Pengcheng and blowing up the gate of the sword forging hall of the lower house must have been spread by some people. He did not believe that Yun Chuzhou had such guts. Putting everything else aside, Wan Pengcheng was Elder Wan's precious grandson. If Yun Chuzhou really beat up Wan Pengcheng, would Elder Wan keep her alive until now? Therefore, the rumors could not be trusted. Yun Chuzhou curled her lips. I'll give you 2 choices. Either get lost, or stay, and pull the grass. Chen Bufan was dumbfounded. Pull the grass. This stupid girl's brain was not working, right? Not only did she not give him the pills, but she also wanted him to pull the grass for her. Was he crazy or was he stupid enough to help her pull the grass? Wishful thinking. Seeing that Chen Bufan did not move, Yun Chuzhou immediately released De Hua and 20 skimming giant winged birds. She said faintly, looks like you want to stay and pull the grass. Then let's begin. When Chen Bufan saw De Hua and the shadow birds, he immediately staggered. He initially thought that the rumors were exaggerated, but now that he looked at it, he realized that the rumors were true. This brat's spirit beast was really so abnormal, and how could she have so many demonic birds? Although the spirit energy was not high, this thing had wings, so it had a natural advantage. However, Chen Bufan still felt that Yun Chuzhou was just trying to scare him and did not dare to make a move. He thought that he would not be able to take advantage of her today, so he decided to leave first. Therefore, he turned around and was about to leave the courtyard, but he was blocked by De Hua. He gritted his teeth and said, Yun Chuzhou, don't go too far. If you let me go now, I will pretend that nothing happened, or else I will teach you a lesson. Yun Chuzhou shrugged and said, I told you to leave just now, but you didn't. Now you want to leave. It's too late. Hurry up and pull the grass. If you can't finish it in an hour, I'll let you know why the flowers are so red. Chen Bufan glared at Yun Chuzhou and decided to force his way out. He was sure that Yun Chuzhou wouldn't dare to do anything to him. However, it was obvious that he didn't know He Xinjiu very well. How could she be willing to suffer a loss? A moment later, Chen Bufan began to pull the grass with a swollen face. He Xinjiu kept urging him from behind, "Senior brother Chen, you are an inner disciple, but you can't even pull the grass well. Do you still have the face to keep the inner disciples?" Chen Bufan was so angry that he was twitching. Who said that inner disciples had to know how to pull the grass? Besides, he had already done his best. He was just about to lie on the ground and pull the grass. Just as he was about to retort, he heard Yun Chuzhou say with a smile, "Blue Tail, senior brother Chen is probably trying to slack off again. Do you know what to do?" Before Chen Bufan could react, he felt a sharp pain on his scalp. Those damn giant winged birds were pecking at his hair. Chen Bufan was in so much pain that he was wailing like a ghost. He almost cried out, "Junior sister Yun, I was wrong. I'm going to pull the grass out now. Please tell them to let me go." Yun Chuzhou waved her hand at the giant winged birds. "That's enough. Senior brother Chen still has to pull the grass. Stop teasing him." Chen Bufan was so angry that he almost vomited blood. "Your family is so funny. Those damn birds are going to peck him bald." Chapter 39-49 had plenty of ways to deal with her. An hour later, Chen Bufan finally cleared away the weeds in the yard. Just as he was about to leave, he was dragged to the roof by a giant bird. He had no choice but to start cleaning the weeds on the roof. He thought that this would be enough, but a basin of water and a rag were thrown into the house to clean. Chen Bufan was so regretful that his intestines turned green. If he had known that this Yun Chuzhou was so difficult to deal with, he would have chosen another new disciple. He had thought that a little girl like her would be easy to bully, but who would have thought that she was clearly a devil? Finally, Chen Bufan finished cleaning. Yun Chuzhou looked at the brand new courtyard with satisfaction. It had to be said that the manual cleaning was much cleaner than the puppet cleaning. "Junior sister Yun, can I leave now?" Chen Bufan asked humbly. "Of course you can leave, but you threatened me and caused a huge psychological trauma to me, so you have to compensate me. I think you are quite rich, so 1 million high-grade spirit stones it is." Chen Bufan almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He had to compensate her. 1 million. Dream on. Unfortunately, Chen Bufan was suppressed by force in the end. After paying 100,000 upper-grade spirit stones, he wrote an IOU of 900,000 upper-grade spirit stones and was thrown out of the yard by De Hua. Chen Bufan was so angry that his head was buzzing. He gritted his teeth and limped away. Soon, he met a few disciples who were very proud of themselves. The disciples were shocked when they saw Chen Bufan. "Senior brother Chen, what happened to you? Didn't you go to deal with that Yun Chuzhou? Why are you in such a sorry state? Where is your hair?" "Yes, senior brother Chen, did you get the pill? I heard that Yun Chuzhou is very rich. Did you make a small fortune? Senior brother Chen, did you fall because you were too happy?" Chen Bufan was on the verge of tears. He took care of Yun Chuzhou. He got the pills. He made a small fortune. But he spent 100,000 high-grade spirit stones. He even wrote an IOU of 900,000 high-grade spirit stones. Chen Bufan couldn't care less about losing face. He told them what had happened. "Brothers, I have suffered a great loss today. We have a good relationship, you won't ignore me, right?" The disciples were stunned. How could Yun Chuzhou be so arrogant? "Brother Chen, don't worry. Sooner or later, we will help you teach Yun Chuzhou a lesson. She is just a little girl. What can she do?" "Yes, there are plenty of opportunities to teach her a lesson. When the time comes, the new disciples will be led by the old disciples on missions. We will find an opportunity to teach her a lesson. Also, isn't there an inner sect competition every month? During the competition, we are not allowed to use spiritual beasts and other random things. When the time comes, we will think of a way to scheme against her. Chen Bufan listened to the words of the few of them and a sinister smile appeared on his face. What they said was right, there were plenty of ways to teach that wretched girl a lesson in the inner sect. Just wait and see. On the other side, Yun Chujil had planted flowers and plants in the courtyard. She had even built a swing frame with a tinkling sound. The small courtyard instantly became full of vitality. At night, Yun Chujil deliberately leaned against the crack of the door to observe the situation outside. She did not find anything unusual, and her heart relaxed. It seemed that the murderous aura would only gather in the haunted house and would not come to find trouble with her. Chapter 3950, The Killing Aura of Swinging on a Swing. On the second day, all the new disciples had to go to the sword hall of the middle court to learn the 7 stars sword technique. Although Yun Chujil did not fancy the 7 stars sword technique, she could only reluctantly go to the sword hall of the middle court. What surprised Yun Chujil was that the one who taught them the 7 stars sword technique was actually Wan Qingba. He was really haunting them. Wan Qingba didn't seem to be out of the ordinary. He taught them the 7 stars sword technique one by one. When the time was up, he left. Yun Chujil frowned. She had heard that Wan Qingba was only responsible for teaching the lower house sword hall. Now that he was in the middle house sword hall, there was something wrong even if she used her heel to think about it. While Yun Chujil was thinking about it, she heard the complaints of the new disciples. They were complaining that they had been robbed of pills by the old disciples. Zhao Hui approached Yun Chujil and asked, "Junior sister Yun, did that Chen Bufan also extort you?" Yun Chujil smiled and took out a piece of paper from her storage ring and handed it to Zhao Hui. When Zhao Hui saw the contents, he was so shocked that his mouth could fit a duck egg. Junior sister Yun, this was written by Chen Bufan. Yun Chujil nodded. Not only did he help me pull the grass yesterday, he also promised to give me 1 million upper-grade spirit stones. Since he didn't have that much money, he wrote this IOU for me. I have to say, the quality of this inner sect disciple is really high. He's too willing to help others. The corners of Zhao Hu's eyes twitched. Are you sure that he was willing to help others and not forced to do so? Yun Chujil glanced at Zhao Hui. Senior brother Zhao Hui, you've been scammed. Zhao Hui laughed bitterly. I don't have junior sister Yun's confidence, so I naturally didn't dare to fight them head-on. I spent money to get rid of them. Mu Jiang's temper is really stubborn. He took a beating but still didn't hand over the pills. Yun Chujil glanced at Mu Jiang, who had an awkward expression on his face. As expected, his face was bruised and swollen. She didn't say anything. Although she was protective of her own shortcomings, she didn't have to care about everything. Zhao Hui didn't continue this topic, but said, I see that martial uncle Zhang didn't come to class. However, he was previously a true disciple, so he naturally didn't need to come and learn some 7-star sword technique. Yun Chujil's heart moved when she heard this. Yesterday, Zhangli had said that Master Ouyang was looking for him, and then there was no news. Could it be that something had happened? She immediately took out her identity jade token and sent a message to Zhangli. Zhangli replied very quickly, and his tone was not the slightest bit abnormal. Yun Chujil did not ask any more questions. Firstly, it was not good to interfere too much. Secondly, this fellow could not wait to go to the cafeteria in the middle courtyard for a stroll. Yun Chujil immediately went to the canteen in the middle courtyard with Zhao Hui and Mu Jiang. As expected, the dishes in the canteen were much richer than those in the lower courtyard. The taste was also better. Yun Chujil immediately packed a few large food boxes. The servants in the canteen in the middle courtyard had obviously heard of this fellow's reputation. Although their attitude was not too warm, they did not make things difficult for her. After Yun Chuzhou and Zhao Hui separated, they hopped back to their own courtyard. However, after pushing open the courtyard door, this fellow was so angry that she almost fainted. She saw that the originally vibrant flowers and plants had turned into broken leaves. What made her even angrier was that the red murderous aura was, playing on the swing, having a great time. What the fuck? All of you murderous auras are floating around all day long, haven't you been floating enough? And you want to swing on her swing? Shameless. Wait, the real question is, why are these drifters in her new yard? Are you going to fight her to the death? Chapter 39:51 Shameless drifters. When the murderous aura saw that Yun Chuzhou had returned, it continued to play on the swing, as if it did not see her. Yun Chuzhou was so angry. She gritted her teeth and took out the relic, and the murderous aura immediately rolled away. Yun Chuzhou looked at the messy courtyard and was so angry that she started to twitch. She realized that no matter which courtyard she switched to, these damn drifters would follow her. Although she guessed that the killing aura was caused by the large kitchen knife, she would definitely not give up the large kitchen knife because of these drifters. Therefore, she could only endure it. At most, the courtyard would be in a state of decline. The rest would not affect anything. However, a few days later, He Xinjiu was in a mess. At the beginning, as long as she took out the relic, the killing aura would run away dejectedly. Later on, only when she took out the relic and chased away the killing aura would it shamelessly leave. It was getting more and more shameless. The most outrageous thing was that the murderous aura had learned to retreat when the enemy advanced. As soon as Yun Chuzhou stopped, they would shamelessly sneak back into the yard, play on the swing, or scare Buttface. Buttface was on the verge of breaking down. Woo-woo, little fairy, I'm going to be scared to death by these damn things. Think of a way to drive them away, or I'll die for you to see. Yun Chuzhou kicked it. Die far away. Not only was Dog 2 not sad, it even said flatteringly, little fairy, you haven't kicked me or scolded me for a long time. I feel very comfortable all over. You can scold me a little more. Yun Chuzhou, damn it, I can't live like this anymore. I don't have any normal things around me. Who has a bunch of drifters playing on swings and chasing dogs in their yard? Whose spiritual pets are always asking for a scolding? Whose fiancé has turned into a small snake for no reason? After a few more days of torture, Yun Chuzhou was already numb. Anyway, those drifters were afraid of the relics on her body and didn't dare to attack her, so it was up to them. As for that idiot Buttface, he was most likely just a broken pot that had been thrown away. At the beginning, he was crying in fear, but later on, he simply started playing with those balls of murderous aura. Moreover, he seemed to be having fun. Yun Chuzhou could not help but sigh. Indeed, time was a sharp weapon that could smooth over everything and change everything. It was as if she had seen a ghost. Yun Chuzhou was initially worried that someone would discover the murderous aura, or that the murderous aura would attack others. However, she later discovered that as long as someone approached her courtyard, the murderous aura would dissipate, no one would discover it, and no one would attack anyone else. Yun Chuzhou could not help but smile bitterly. Could it be that these drifters would only attack her? Did she really make them like her that much? On this day, Elder Dongfang sent someone to look for Yun Chuzhou. First, he asked her if she was used to being in the inner sect. Then, he went straight to the point. Yun Chuzhou, you once promised to go to the Raging Flame mountain range once a month to collect the King Fire Essence Beast's Earth Fire. It should be about time, right? Lai Yan asked Yun Chuzhou. Yun Chuzhou had been busy fighting with those murderous auras recently, so she had really forgotten about this matter. After hearing Elder Dongfang's words, she immediately said, you are right. I will set off tomorrow to collect the King Fire Essence Beast's Earth Fire Essence. However, you have to send more people to protect me. After all, the King Fire Essence Beast's Earth Fire Essence is also a rare item. If it is robbed by another sect, it will be terrible. Chapter 3952 Went to collect earth fire again. Yun Chujo said this because she was indeed afraid of being robbed, second because she was afraid that Tower Master Luochen would send people to take her away, and third because she was afraid that the Divine Devil Hall would appear again. This fellow felt that he was also quite bitter. Why did he have so many enemies? As expected, the heavens were jealous of Hong Yen. She was just too beautiful. Elder Dongfang felt that what Yun Chujo said made sense. After thinking about it, he decided to personally accompany Yun Chujo. He was really curious that those king-level fire spirit beasts would really abandon their integrity because of some food. When Yun Chujo heard this, she was overjoyed. With this amulet, her safety was guaranteed. The next day, Elder Dongfang and dozens of inner disciples accompanied Yun Chujo to Lai Yen mountain range. Although Elder Dongfang wanted to keep a low profile and not attract the attention of other sects, it was inevitable that there would be spies from other sects in the Nameless Sword sect. Therefore, when Elder Dongfang and the others arrived at the Lai Yen mountain range, ran into several groups of people from other forces. Those people are thick-skinned to follow behind the Eastern Elder, want to see the King of Fire Spirit Beast's elegant demeanor. Elder Dongfang, out of respect, had no choice but to agree. Yun Chujo gave herself a thumbs up in her heart. Fortunately, she had expected this situation in advance. Otherwise, if she came alone, wouldn't she be chewed into dregs? This fellow could guess the intentions of those people even if she used her heels. She wanted to see how she would trick those king fire spirit beasts so that she could obtain earth fire according to the law. Hee. She was really naive. The reason why those king fire spirit beasts accepted her feeding was because she had done a lot of preparatory work. Most importantly, did they have her sharp tongue? Did they still want to learn from her? Just wait for the consequences. When they arrived at the periphery of the King Fire Spirit Beast territory, 3 King Fire Spirit Beasts in charge of patrolling started to roar at them. Everyone could only stop and look at Yun Chujo. Yun Chujo realized that these 3 King Fire Spirit Beasts were not the ones she had met last time and thought that this was a bit difficult. However, she had to shoot the arrow, so she said to them, "My lords, I am that little fairy who knows how to roast meat. Have you heard of me? I have brought a lot of delicious food here. Can you let me in?" Hearing this, everyone pursed their lips. She called them little fairies. She was really shameless. Moreover, she actually called these King Fire spiritual beasts my lords. How lowly. Moreover, from what she said, these 3 King Fire spirit beasts weren't the ones they had encountered previously. Just relying on her to say a few words, would that be enough? Just as everyone was thinking, those 3 King Fire spirit beasts began to howl loudly. Everyone was so frightened that they turned around and ran. Although they had many people, they didn't have the need to provoke these King Fire spirit beasts with bad tempers. Although Elder Dongfang was still calm, his heart was in his throat. He thought to himself that he would not be able to collect the earth fire this time. Just as he was thinking, he saw several king-level fire spirit beasts running over from afar. Their bright red fur was like several balls of fire. An inner disciple said in fear, "It's over. It's over. They are all out, they are definitely going to eat all of us. Elder Dongfang, let's hurry up and retreat. Otherwise, it will be too late." Elder Dongfang lost his calmness from before and said to Yun Chujo, "Things have changed again, retreat." Chapter 3953 A group of foodies. Yun Chujo was completely speechless. Could it be that they couldn't tell that the group of foodies were going crazy from joy and not from anger? However, it was also good to let them stay further away so as to avoid getting in the way. Thus, she said with a righteous expression, "Elder Dongfang, I was the one who caused the trouble. I can't leave with you guys, or else they will pursue us closely. You guys should retreat. I'll stay behind to attract their attention." Elder Dongfang's heart was greatly touched. He didn't expect this young girl to be so responsible. It was truly rare. He was about to persuade Yun Chuzhou to leave with him when Yun Chuzhou walked towards the group of roaring king-level fire spirit beasts. The disciples behind Elder Dongfang were afraid that Elder Dongfang wouldn't be able to take it lying down and follow them. They dragged Elder Dongfang along as they quickly ran forward. What a joke! With such a large group of king-level fire essence beasts, not to mention them, even 10 times more people would not be their match. Staying behind would only lead to death. After running for some distance, Elder Dongfang broke free from their restraints and stopped in his tracks. He looked in Yun Chuzhou's direction and was stunned. Not only did the king-level fire essence beasts not attack the little girl, they even let the little girl sit on the back of one of the king-level fire essence beasts and walked away under the escort of the other king-level fire essence beasts. What was going on? Could it be that they were going to catch her and eat her slowly? Elder Dongfang was just about to get closer to take a look when a few king fire spirit beasts turned around and growled menacingly. Elder Dongfang could only stop in his tracks. Soon, the group of king fire spirit beasts and Yun Chuzhou disappeared from everyone's sight. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. What was going on? On the other side, Yun Chuzhou sat on the back of a king fire spirit beast and stroked its long fiery red fur. She thought to herself, how cool would it be if this fur was used to make a cape? Of course, this fellow was only thinking about it. Firstly, she could not defeat these king fire spirit beasts. Secondly, she was such a kind person. How could she kill these little things just because of a big cape? Yes, alright, it was mainly because of the first reason. When they arrived at a sheltered place, the group of king-level fire spirit beasts stopped and looked at He Xinjiu while drooling. They had heard that the meat roasted by this little girl was really delicious. If they could not eat the meat roasted by her, then their lives would be in vain. Yun Chuzhou looked at the group of foodies and the corner of her eyes twitched. Fortunately, she had marinated a lot of demonic beast meat in advance, otherwise, she would not be able to satisfy these amazing foodies with huge appetites. Yun Chuzhou immediately started a few bonfires and released puppet number 4 and puppet number 5 to help her roast the meat. In order to prevent these foodies from becoming impatient, Yun Chuzhou threw the meat buns, stewed ribs, and other food that she prepared to them. Finally, it was quiet for the time being. Yun Chuzhou coaxed these ancestors until they were almost done. Only then did she set up a formation to allow them to automatically gather the earth fire. It wasn't that Yun Chuzhou hadn't thought about taking these king-level fire essence beasts for her own use, but after weighing the pros and cons, she gave up. First, the reason why these king-level fire essence beasts were revered was mainly because of their living environment. If they left the Raging Flame mountain range, it wouldn't be of much use if their fighting strength was greatly reduced. Second, possessing wealth was a sin. If she really took in these king-level fire essence beasts, she would probably attract even more trouble. Chapter 3954, Prince Charming. I didn't see anything. Yun Chuzhou was busy for a long time before she sat down to eat while feeding the little silver snake. The little silver snake's eating manner was always elegant and noble. It was like 1,000 miles away from the king-level fire spirit beasts that were wolfing down their food. Yun Chuzhou's evil thoughts appeared again. She poked the little silver snake's head with her finger. Little baby, what do you think about returning to your old place? A certain someone wished that he could sew her mouth shut. The last time he went to the orchard, it was a dark history that he would never be able to wash away. How dare she bring it up? However, a certain someone was already numb from the torture, so he only glanced at her coldly and continued to fight with the ribs. He Xinjiu obviously did not know what restraint was. She continued to boast, idle, I have to say that your figure is getting better and better. It's all that damn Go Weiba fault. Otherwise, we would have little bun and little rice. Now, it's a waste of your good figure. It's simply a waste of God's gift. Otherwise, I would definitely carry you and roll on the bed 8 times a day. A certain Joe's action of gnawing on the ribs paused. 8 times a day. Are you sure? A certain Joe's thoughts were instantly derailed by He Xinjiu's words. She didn't care about gnawing on the ribs. The scene of her peeking the last time suddenly appeared in her mind. 2 nosebleeds flowed down without saying anything. A certain Jiu, the scene instantly became a little awkward, and there was even a hint of ambiguity. After a long while, Hei Shinjo pointed at the small silver snake with a slightly red face and asked, "You, what exactly did you think of? Are you thinking of something unhealthy? You pervert." A certain Jiu never thought that he would be associated with the word pervert. Heaven and earth had a conscience, was this his fault? She was the one who started it all right? What do you mean 10 or 8 times? The nosebleed is getting worse. Hei Shinjo glared at him fiercely. Just as she was about to scold him a few more times, a dazzling brilliance flashed past. Then, a certain someone, who was gorgeous in broad daylight, sprinted. Hei Shinjo was instantly stunned by the beautiful scenery in front of her. The sunlight shone on that well-defined skin. It was simply too sexy, wasn't it? Even those king fire spirit beast foodies forgot to eat their food and stared at a certain sprinted being with their mouths agape. Oh my god, they really didn't lie to the beast. There was actually an additional surprise. TSK, this man's figure was really good. If they could cultivate into human form in the future, would they also have such a good figure? Unfortunately, the beautiful scenery was fleeting. In just a few breaths' time, that man had already put on his clothes and could not see anything. The head of a certain beast buzzed. No matter what, it was at night the last time. But today, it was actually in broad daylight, and it was even seen by so many king fire spirit beasts. They had to kill them to silence them. Those foodies had very sharp senses. Just as a certain beast was emitting killing intent, they had already darted into the earth fire. They were also very wronged, alright? It wasn't them who wanted to see it, it was him who took the initiative to run away, alright? Moreover, seeing it wouldn't make him lose a piece of meat, how stingy. A certain beast was embarrassed, angry, and also a little embarrassed. Alright, no matter who ran in broad daylight, they wouldn't feel good, okay? Yun Chujo covered her eyes with her claws. Prince Charming, don't worry, I didn't see anything. A certain someone sneered. If you wipe the saliva from the corner of your mouth, maybe I can still believe you. Chapter 3955, Calm down, calm down. Hei Shinjo awkwardly wiped the saliva on the corner of her mouth. This was not her fault for being useless. She was really a feast for the eyes. However, this fellow was now afraid that Biming would settle the score after autumn. He obediently stood there and pretended to be a mushroom, hoping that a certain honored guest would suffer from amnesia and would not remember what she had done. However, she was destined to be disappointed. Biming tidied his clothes and said to Hei Shinjo, "Sit down. Let's talk about what happened at this stage." Hei Shinjo immediately shivered and took a few steps back. She laughed dryly. What happened recently? Nothing has happened recently. Do you want to talk to me about my participation in the selection of inner disciples or about the killing aura? Biming laughed lightly. What do you think I want to talk about? Why don't we talk about the lullaby first? Yun Chujia's eyes started to wander around. Oh no, the gigolo was really going to settle the score. However, this guy's heart skipped a beat. The gigolo had transformed back into his human form after maintaining it for a short while last time, and it must be the same this time. In that case, what was she afraid of? Therefore, the gigolo suddenly hardened up and said with a cheeky smile, "A lullaby? Didn't you take the initiative to sing it for me? I haven't complained about your terrible singing. Let me tell you, you should thank me for not complaining about you." Biming was so angry that he was amused. His figure flashed, and he had already trapped Hei Shinjo in his arms. You complained about my terrible singing? Huh? Hei Xinjia's face turned red. What the fuck? Why was the pretty boy so handsome for no reason? He was so handsome that she could not breathe. Seeing that she did not speak, Di Biming lowered his head and asked again in a low voice, "My singing is terrible, isn't it? Did I take the initiative to sing? Little baby? Little beauty, huh?" He Xinjia's face was so red that it was about to bleed. Recalling that a certain snake was about to turn into a silver snake soon, she finally had some confidence. She curled her lips and said, "Prince Charming, let me tell you, how are you going to torture me now? When you turn into a snake later, I will return it to you 100-fold or 1,000 times over. If you don't believe me, let's give it a try." Hearing Yun Chujia's words, Di Biming chuckled a few times in a low voice. However, these few laughs made Yun Chujio inexplicably tremble a little. Could it be that the gigolo was divided? "Little Jiu, you seem to have made a mistake. I have completely broken through the seal, so I won't turn into a snake again." He Xinjia's head buzzed. It was over. She wouldn't die if she didn't seek death. She had dug herself a hole and buried herself. The guy's eyes rolled around. Finally, he thought of an excuse. "Prince Charming, although you won't turn into a snake anymore, your excitement will trigger the cold poison in your body. So, calm down. You must stay calm. Is impulsiveness a devil, or is it the kind of devil that harms others and yourself?" Di Biming curled his lips and stared at her with his deep eyes. He said with a half-smile, "I forgot to tell you. This is a blessing in disguise. The cold poison in my body has been temporarily suppressed. Therefore, I don't need to seal my 7 emotions and 6 desires anymore. Therefore, you don't have to worry about me anymore. Didn't you say before that you wanted to go back and forth? Why don't we try it now?" He Xinjiu felt that her little heart was about to jump out of her throat. She wailed in her heart, "It's over, it's over." There was really no way to live this time. Moreover, the pretty boy must have been triggered too much. He did not even care about his previous coldness. He would not really have sex with her right here, would he? Chapter 3956, I was just joking with you. He Xinjiu stammered, "Prince Charming, I was just joking with you in the past. Really, I was just joking. If you feel angry, you can call me little baby, little beauty, or let me sing you a lullaby. I will sing it for you right now. The boundless horizon is my love, the flowers are blooming at the foot of the green mountain, what kind of rhythm is the most swaying?" Di Biming listened to Yun Chujia's song and his expression was a little dazed. He still remembered that when he first met this little rascal, she had deliberately sung this lullaby for him. At that time, he was shocked, not to mention sleeping. Yun Chujio saw that a certain someone's expression was a little more relaxed, and she sang even harder. If it wasn't for a certain someone imprisoning her, this guy would have wanted to perform a square dance with her. She cursed in her heart. She didn't expect that the gigolo who hated the sky to actually like this tune. When this guy was singing happily, his voice suddenly stopped because he was forcefully kissed. In the earth and fire, a group of king fire spirit beasts were winking at the 2 people who were making out with each other. Their faces were full of gossip. Io, who would have thought that the fruit-sprinting man would be so passionate, kissing in front of them? Also, wasn't that little girl quite loud? Why did she become so obedient now? And that blushing face, it was even redder than their long hair. After a long time, He Xinjiu finally regained her freedom. The first thing she did was to throw a certain someone on the ground and kiss him. Her idea was very simple. She couldn't lose anything. She had lost a lot just now, so she had to kiss him back. Her behavior scared the king-level fire spiritual beasts. Oh my, this little girl was too fierce. TSK, it really opened their eyes. After a long time, Di Biming suppressed the urge to take a step further and said in a hoarse voice, "Little Jiu, if you don't let go of me, I will really carry you and roll around 10 times. He Xinjiu glanced at a certain place of Di Biming and immediately flew away, rolling around and pulling away from a certain someone. A certain someone, however, he didn't say anything. Instead, he looked coldly at those king-level fire spirit beasts who were watching with relish. Those foodies immediately ran into the earth fire again. Hei Shinjo thought of her embarrassing behavior and instantly, her thick-skinned face turned red again. She originally wanted to forcefully kiss the pretty boy, but in the end, it was so embarrassing. A certain someone looked at Hei Shinjo who was blushing and suddenly felt that he had regained some of his lost pride and face. Thinking about it again, there was no one else present when he ran away, so it wasn't really embarrassing. Well, that was it. As for those king-level fire spiritual beasts, a certain someone had selectively lost his memory. After some psychological work, a certain someone returned to his usual cold and aloof appearance. He said to Hei Shinjo indifferently, "Little Joe, before I leave, I'll make a trip to the 9 pavilions to create some trouble for them. Lan Luochen shouldn't have time to take care of you for the time being. You should properly cultivate in the Nameless Sword sect, do you understand?" Although Yun Chujo couldn't bear to see Di Baiming leave, this fellow was both embarrassed and angry at the same time. She glared at him and said, "I understand. Hurry up and leave." When Di Baiming heard that, although there was a faint smile in his eyes, his tone was a little cold as he said, "Little Joe, if I find out that you don't cultivate properly, we will settle the old scores together. I won't forgive you." Chapter 3957 was really a bunch of foodies. Hei Shinjo waved her hands randomly. I know. You should leave quickly. Stop wasting time." A certain someone, although Di Baiming was reluctant and worried, he still had a lot of things to do, so he could only grit his teeth and leave. After taking a few steps, he turned his head and looked at the king fire essence beasts that were poking their heads out. He gave them a warning look with a cold gaze before leaving. When the king-level fire spirit beasts saw that the fiend had finally left, they could not wait to jump out and continue eating and drinking. Yun Chujo pouted and her heart felt empty. Although Di Baiming had only stayed by her side in the form of a small snake before, she had inexplicably felt at ease. Now that he had left, she suddenly felt that she had no backbone. She sat on the ground, hugging her knees with both hands. Her eyes were a little lost, and there was even a hint of watery light in them. Even the foodies and fire spirit beasts could feel her sadness at this moment. Even though the roasted meat had been eaten up, they forcefully endured it and did not disturb her. They could only pitifully lick the bones that had already been eaten up. It was not that these foodies were so understanding, but when they thought of the warning look in the demon's eyes before he left, they felt that it was better to be obedient. After a while, Yun Chujo used her sleeve to randomly wipe away her tears. Self-pity would never solve the problem. If she wanted to be with that pretty boy for a long time, she had to become stronger. Instead of wasting her time here, she might as well think of a way to get struck by lightning a few more times or find the second half of the stone wall sword technique. After she had adjusted her mood, she first went to look at the few formations that collected earth fire. Then, she began to command the 2 puppets to continue helping those king-level fire essence beasts roast meat. If she wanted to gain a foothold in the Nameless Sword sect, she had to cling on to one leg. After these few days of observation, Elder Dongfang was undoubtedly a good target. The earth fire of these king-level fire essence beasts was the key to fawning over him, so naturally, she had to feed these foodies. Yun Chujo recalled the abnormality of the large kitchen knife. Coincidentally, there was nothing much going on, so she took out the large kitchen knife. In any case, those drifters wouldn't be able to chase her here. She looked left and right, but she couldn't see any difference between the large kitchen knife and the previous one. Why did it attract so much killing intent? Also, why did the Nameless Sword sect have so much killing intent? Yun Chujo pondered for a while but still couldn't figure it out. She simply took the large kitchen knife and practiced the sword technique on the stone wall. She didn't know if it was Yun Chuji's misconception, but she felt that the power of the sword technique seemed to be a little stronger than before. Perhaps it was because the large kitchen knife had swallowed the sword light? This fellow suddenly had a thought. If the big kitchen knife could spit out the sword light that it had swallowed, wouldn't it be a great killing weapon? Of course, she only thought about it. She felt that this thought was too naive. The big kitchen knife had swallowed the sword light to repair the crack. It had long been digested, so how could it spit it out? Yun Chujo did not stop practicing her sword until her clothes were soaked in sweat. She watched the foodies gulp down their food while panting. The king-level fire spiritual beasts were eating in a sorry state. They were eating in a hurry. Some of them were so hot that they were spinning around on the ground. Some of them were choking, and some of them were so anxious that they even ate the uncooked meat. Yun Chujo could not help but laugh. These foodies were really gluttonous. However, it was also because they were gluttonous that she had the chance to control them. Chapter 3958, Strange Style. For 3 days in a row, Yun Chujo fed the king-level fire spirit beasts. They ate and slept, and after sleeping, they ate. It was as if they were living a godlike life. They wished that Yun Chujo would never leave. Yun Chujo saw that these foodies were too greedy, and before she left, she specially warned them, humans are evil, especially since you have the earth fire. Therefore, don't eat the food given to you by others. Also, even if there are people who look like me, you have to be careful to distinguish them so that you won't be poisoned to death. Do you know? Those king-level fire spirit beasts rolled their eyes. This little girl had underestimated them too much. If they were easy to bully, they would have been captured long ago. Moreover, only she could get close to them. If it were other people, they wouldn't even be able to get close to their territory. Seeing their absent-minded expressions, Yun Chujo intentionally struck the lightning a few times, then took out a large kitchen knife and waved it around. Without these two things, it definitely wouldn't be me. Remember. Seeing Yun Chuji's serious expression, the king-level fire spirit beasts nodded their heads, indicating that they understood. Only then did Yun Chujo put away the earth fire that she had gathered and strolled out of the king-level fire spirit beast's territory. Elder Dongfang's eyes were almost piercing. Seeing that Yun Chujo had returned safely, the stone in his heart was finally lifted. The other disciples all thought that Yun Chujo was dead for sure. They did not expect that she had actually returned, and they were all extremely surprised. After Yun Chujo bowed to Elder Dongfang, she said with a smile, although those fire spirit beasts have a bad temper, they still kept their promise. I have already gathered the earth fire. We can return to the sect now. Elder Dongfang was surprised and delighted. He immediately led everyone back with a bright smile on his face. On the way, they met people from other sections. When they saw that Yun Chujo was safe and sound, they were all very surprised. When they heard that she had successfully gathered the earth fire of a king-level fire spirit beast, they couldn't help but feel a little envious. Of course, there were also people who had other thoughts. Since this Yun Chujo could exchange her food for the earth fire, could they do the same? Yun Chujo naturally saw through these people's thoughts and was too lazy to say anything. Even if she did, they would only think that their nameless sword sect wanted to eat alone. Since that was the case, why bother? When they were on the flying spirit tool, Yun Chujo secretly gave Elder Dongfang a portion of earth fire. Elder Dongfang naturally accepted it with a smile, and his impression of Yun Chujo improved. That evening, everyone arrived at the nameless sword sect. Yun Chujo first went to the bounty pavilion to hand over the earth fire in exchange for 10,000 sect contribution points. Only then did she return to her own courtyard. However, this fellow had left half of the earth fire in his storage ring as a precaution in case of an emergency. As soon as she pushed open the courtyard door, the drifters immediately jumped down from the swing and wanted to drill into Yun Chuji's glabella. Yun Chujo was so angry that she kept twitching. She held the relic and said, "Get lost. If you come any closer, I'll recite the scriptures." After Yun Chujo said that, her heart skipped a beat. Since these drifters were afraid of the relic, perhaps they were really afraid of the monks chanting the scriptures. Therefore, this guy racked his brain to think of a few verses of the Diamond Sutra and began to recite it. Needless to say, the murderous aura immediately drifted back to the swing and stopped coming in front of her. Yun Chujo was delighted. She planned to go to the sect to buy a few Buddhist scriptures from the place that sold sundries the next day. If she had nothing to do, she would let Dog 2 recite them. But face, what does this have to do with her? Besides, if these drifters didn't attack her, it would be quite fun. She would just keep them. Moreover, she was an ancient fierce beast, yet she was reciting Buddhist scriptures. This scene was very strange, okay? Chapter 3959 Buying Buddhist Scriptures. Although Dog 2 tried its best to stop her, the next morning, Yun Chujo still went to the Nameless Sword Sect's exchange pavilion, which specialized in selling items. Although the exchange pavilion was very big, it was clearly divided into areas according to the items sold. Yun Chujo came to the sundry area and scanned the area, but she didn't find any Buddhist scriptures. Steward Lee, who was in charge of selling, saw her looking around and asked enthusiastically, "Junior sister, what do you want to buy?" "Buddhist scriptures." Manager Lee, "Nothing. Are you sure your brain isn't sick? I've never heard of any cultivator buying Buddhist scriptures." When the other disciples who were buying things heard that Yun Chujo wanted to buy Buddhist scriptures, they were all dumbfounded. Some of the disciples who knew Yun Chujo whispered, "You don't know her, right? She is that Yun Chujo. She has always been different from others. I guess she has done too many wrong things, so she came to buy Buddhist scriptures." "I don't think so. I heard that she rejected Tower Master Luchen's proposal to marry her. Could it be that she has seen through the secular world and wants to become a monk?" What you said makes sense. I heard that there was a period of time when she was running around with a bald head. She is most likely going to become a monk." Yun Chujo did not care about the gossip of these people. What she was more concerned about was that the exchange pavilion did not have Buddhist scriptures. It seemed that she could only go to the bookstore in the town to take a look when she went out on a mission. Yun Chujo left the exchange pavilion somewhat disappointed. Not long after she walked out, she heard someone shouting from behind, Junior Sister Yun, wait a moment." Yun Chujo turned her head and saw a disciple wearing an inner sect uniform running over. Yun Chujo saw that he looked very unfamiliar and could not help but wonder why he stopped her. Just as Yun Chujo was puzzled, the disciple said with a smile, "Junior Sister Yun, I heard that you are looking for Buddhist scriptures. I happen to have one here. However, this price." The disciple rubbed his hands, looking as if he could not open his mouth. Yun Chujo raised her eyebrows. "The price is easy to negotiate. Let me see the goods first." Seeing that Yun Chujo agreed so readily, the disciple could not help but be overjoyed. He took out a sheepskin scroll from his storage ring and handed it to Yun Chujo. When Yun Chujo saw that the sheepskin scroll was made of the skin of a poisonous antelope, she could not help but be shocked. This thing seemed to have been passed down from the ancient times and should have been around for a long time. Yun Chujo untied the hemp rope tied to the sheepskin scroll. When she saw the words on it, she immediately understood why the disciple was willing to take it out. It was because the words on it were all ancient characters. The disciple was able to determine that this was a Buddhist scripture because there were some Buddha statues on it. Yun Chujo recognized some of the words on it sporadically. She could roughly determine that this was really a Buddhist scripture, but it was just that it was relatively old. Her heart skipped a beat. Although she couldn't recognize all of these characters, Dog 2 was an ancient beast, so she could buy it and let it read it. Although she had already made up her mind to buy this Buddhist scripture, her face showed some anger. "Senior brother, are you playing with me? These are all ancient characters, how can I recognize them?" The disciple said embarrassedly, "Junior Sister Yun, that, as the saying goes, if one is sincere, it will work. This Buddhist scripture doesn't necessarily have to be recognized to be effective. You can copy it a few times if you have nothing to do." Yun Chujia's expression softened a little. "What you said makes sense. How many sect contribution points do you want?" "Let's say it first, if it's expensive, I won't buy it." Anyway, this thing is of little value. Chapter 3960, Urguzi recites the Buddhist scriptures. The disciple saw that Yun Chujo was not very interested and was afraid that the deal would be ruined. He quickly said, "Junior sister Yun, you are also a person who knows the goods. This is a sheepskin scroll that has been passed down since ancient times. Back then, I also obtained it by chance. There is no need to say more about the dangers in it." Yun Chujo frowned. "Senior brother, I still have things to do and don't have time to listen to your story. Just tell me how much it is." "Junior sister Yun, 200 sect contribution points. What do you think?" The disciple quickly stretched out 2 fingers and said nervously. When he first got this thing, he was ecstatic. He thought that he had gotten something amazing. However, both the manager of the Bounty Pavilion and the Exchange Pavilion thought that this thing was useless. At most, he would only pay 50 sect contribution points to buy it. He was not willing to sell it. Today, when he saw that Yun Chujo was actually looking for Buddhist scriptures, he immediately felt that an opportunity had come. Initially, he wanted to ask for 500 sect contribution points, but when he saw Yun Chujo's disdainful look, he could only change his mind and ask for 200 sect contribution points. Although Yun Chujo felt that 200 sect contribution points was not expensive, she still bargained with that disciple. In the end, she bought the sheepskin scroll at a price of 180 points. After returning to the courtyard, Yun Chujo saw the drifters jumping up and down on the swing. She immediately revealed a sinister smile. "Damn drifters, I'll send you all away very soon." After Yun Chujo released Buttface, she threw the newly obtained sheepskin scroll to Buttface. "Buttface, here, read it." Buttface blinked his dog eyes and said with some shame, "Little fairy, I don't know how to read." It would be a ghost if Yun Chujo believed him. He was not like Xiao Hanyo, who were just young and lost part of their inheritance. How could a mature ancient beast not know ancient characters? "Either you read it for me obediently, or you don't have to eat tonight." Seeing that Yun Chujo did not look like she was joking, Buttface could only open the sheepskin scroll bitterly. It was a great ancient beast, but it had to recite Buddhist scriptures. It was a laughing stock. Buttface began to stutter as he recited the Buddhist scriptures. Buddhist scriptures were difficult to understand to begin with, and coupled with the fact that Buttface was a half-baked illiterate, it was a tragic sight to see. Yun Chujo finally understood that Buttface wasn't completely lying when he said he couldn't read. This fellow probably couldn't read more than her. The kitten in the spirit beast bag couldn't help but twitch its lips as it listened to Buttface's stuttering recitation. Fierce beasts were a bunch of coquettish bitches. As expected, they couldn't compare to the noble origins of their divine beasts. They couldn't even recognize the words. How embarrassing. After muttering for a while, Yun Chujo realized that not only did the drifters not escape, but they were also jumping around with great interest, as if they were playing with monkeys. Yun Chujo was furious. She might as well throw the sheepskin scroll into her storage ring. She was prepared to buy some Buddhist scriptures that she knew when she had the chance. She would definitely chase these drifters away. What Yun Chujo didn't notice was that there was a trace of craftiness in Buttface's dog eyes. He felt that he was simply awesome. He had finally gotten rid of the fate of reciting scriptures. Although he was labeled as a semi-literate, it was still 100 times better than the miserable reciting of scriptures. Since she didn't have any Buddhist scriptures, the plan to chase away the drifters could only be put on hold temporarily. Yun Chujo could only let the murderous aura continue to roil in the courtyard. Chapter 3961, 3 puppet discs. In the next few days, everything was peaceful. However, 2 major events had happened in the northern continent. One was that Tower Master Luochen of the 9 Pavilions had been stabbed by someone. It was said that he would not be able to recover for at least 2 to 3 months. Furthermore, some of the powers of the 9 Pavilions had also been taken down by someone. The 9 Pavilions were unable to take care of themselves for the time being. As for the other matter, the disciples of Xuanji sect, Flying Flower Island, and a few other sects had rashly provoked the King Fire Essence Beast, resulting in heavy casualties. Yun Chuzhou rubbed her chin and pondered for a moment. The first thing was probably done by the gigolo. The second thing was most likely that those people saw that she had easily obtained the king-level Fire Essence Beast's Earth Fire, so they wanted to try their luck, and then it was tragic. It was just a pity that the gigolo wasn't able to kill that piece of trash, Lan Luochen. Thinking of Lan Luochen, Yun Chuzhou thought of the puppets number 1, number 2, and number 3 that had self-destructed. She sighed. She had not been able to find the right materials for the puppets. Otherwise, she would have created 3 more puppets. Even if they were created, they would not be the original puppets anymore. They had completely disappeared. However, it was fine to make 3 puppet discs first. When there was a suitable shell, she could just install the puppet discs. Thinking of this, Yun Chuzhou began to make the puppet discs. The murderous aura was curiously jumping around. Yun Chuzhou couldn't be bothered with them and continued to make the puppet discs by herself. Soon, the final step of making the puppet discs was to separate 3 strands of soul consciousness and inject them into the puppet discs. Only then would the puppets have intelligence. Yun Chuzhou was afraid that the drifters would cause trouble, so she deliberately placed the relics in front of her and asked Buttface to keep an eye on the drifters to prevent them from taking the opportunity to attack her. A moment later, Yun Chuzhou injected the 3 wisps of her consciousness into the puppet disc. However, something unexpected happened. The murderous aura ignored the threat of the relic and ran away with the 3 puppet discs. They ran away. They ran away. Yun Chuzhou was so angry that she almost fainted. She didn't care much and chased after them. Unfortunately, she didn't know how the murderous aura did it. Not only did they disappear, but the 3 puppet discs also disappeared. Buttface said eagerly, "Little fairy, you don't have to worry. Your spiritual sense is in those puppet discs. Try using your spiritual sense and you'll definitely find their hiding place. You'll just destroy their nest." Yun Chuzhou thought that it made sense, so her spiritual sense was getting weaker and weaker. She chose a direction and chased after them. After chasing after them, she never expected that the final location of the murderous aura was actually the sword pool. Yun Chuzhou's heart skipped a beat. The reason why the large kitchen knife had attracted so much murderous aura was most likely because the large kitchen knife had swallowed too much sword light. Yun Chuzhou stood by the sword pool and watched the murderous aura bounce back and forth in the sword pool. Moreover, it even tossed the 3 puppet plates around like toys. Yun Chuzhou was so angry that she almost vomited blood. Yun Chuzhou had a stomach full of bad ideas. She had never suffered such a big loss before. Now, she was actually fooled by these drifters. One could imagine the fury in her heart. She gritted her teeth and looked at the jumping drifters. She should have been able to command the puppet discs. After all, there was a strand of her spiritual sense in them. However, the murderous aura was so thick that she had no way to command the puppet discs. Chapter 3962 Repayment of Debts. Just as Yun Chuzhou was gnashing her teeth and watching, someone walked over. Yun Chuzhou was originally worried that the drifters and the puppet discs would be discovered, but when she looked up, there were no more drifters and puppet discs, only flickering sword lights. "Yun Chuzhou, what are you doing here? Leave quickly." A shout came from behind. Yun Chuzhou turned around and saw that it was Manager Li from the sword pool who had spoken. Yun Chuzhou was already full of anger. Moreover, she had let Manager Li and his son have their way last time because she was afraid that her killing intent would leak out. They had locked her in the bitter cold cave, and now they were actually provoking her. They were really courting death. She sneered and said, "Manager Li, this sword pool doesn't belong to your Li family, right? What's wrong with me standing here?" Manager Li choked, however, he quickly said with a gloomy face, "Yun Chuzhou, every time you approach the sword pool, something happens to the sword pool. Perhaps it's because you have the heavenly thunder spirit root that you brought disaster. If you know your place, then quickly leave the sword pool. When the disciples who were cultivating near the sword pool heard the dispute between the two, they looked at Yun Chuzhou with a subtle look. Yes, they also heard that Yun Chuzhou had the heavenly thunder spirit root, which was not tolerated by the heavenly Tao. The accident in the sword pool happened after she entered the sect. Could it really be because of her? While the disciples were whispering among themselves, they heard Yun Chuzhou chuckle a few times. Manager Li, according to what you said, I think the culprit is you. Maybe it's because you're too wicked. That's why the sword pool that you're in charge of has problems time and time again. You're a jinx. Yun Chuzhi's way of returning the favor angered Manager Li so much that his face turned red. He gritted his teeth and said, I won't argue with you. In short, all the disciples can only cultivate on the flat ground below. They can't go near the sword pool. Those who violate it will be severely punished. Yun Chuzhou shrugged her shoulders. Does that include you? After all, if a jinx like you goes near the sword pool every day, perhaps the last sword light in the sword pool will disappear too. Manager Li was so angry that he was gnashing his teeth. Just as he was about to say something, Yun Chuzhou took out a piece of paper from her storage ring and waved it. Oh right, your son owes me 2 million upper-grade spirit stones. The 3-month deadline is coming up soon. If he still doesn't repay me, I will have to collect his sect's resources on his behalf. Manager Li couldn't believe his eyes. Hasn't this loan already been torn up in the discipline hall? Yes, the previous one was indeed torn up. Li Zhuangji borrowed it from me later. Hurry up and pay me back. Yun Chuzhou sneered in her heart. She tore up nothing but a piece of waste paper back then. Was she trying to scheme against her? Dream on. Manager Li thought for a moment and understood that he had been deceived by Yun Chuzhou that day. He was filled with hatred and regret. It would have been great if he had taken a good look at it back then. He would not have let this wretched girl take advantage of the loophole. Yun Chuzhou, this debit note was clearly signed by you when you threatened Zhuangji that day. It can't be counted at all. If you know your place, return the debit note to me immediately. Otherwise, if you cause trouble in the discipline hall, you won't have a good ending. Yun Chuzhou put away the note again and said with a smile, the original note has been torn up in front of everyone. This note was written by Li Zhuangji willingly. It's only right and proper to repay a debt. Where are you going to sue? I'm also reasonable. I advise you to pay back the money quickly if you have the time. After all, inner sect resources are still quite important to that trash Li Zhuangji. Chapter 3963, Play with these drifters to death. After Yun Chuzhou finished speaking, she swaggered off. Manager Li, who had remained at the same spot, wanted nothing more than to chase after her and slap her to death. He stared at Yun Chuzhi's back viciously. Darn girl, keep showing off. Soon, you'll be in trouble. Because the drifter had stolen the 3 puppet discs, Yun Chuzhou was still very depressed even though she had dissed Manager Li for a while. The 3 puppet discs had been sucked into the sword pool by the murderous aura. There was no way for her to snatch them back. Could it be that she could only stare and suffer? What made Yun Chuzhou even angrier was that the moment she stepped into the courtyard, the drifters acted as if nothing had happened and followed her into the courtyard. Furthermore, they were jumping around her, almost infuriating He Xinzhou to death. She decided to get a Buddhist scripture no matter what, or else she would definitely be angered to death by these drifters. Thinking of this, she directly went to the lower house's bounty pavilion and issued a mission. Not only did she request to buy Buddhist scriptures, but she also wanted to buy Buddhist beads, wooden fish, and kasaya. This time, everyone felt that Yun Chuzhou was going to become a monk. However, this kasaya was used by a monk, so she did not seem to need it, right? However, regardless of whether she could use it or not, this mission was much easier to complete than other missions. As long as she went out to carry out the mission, she could easily buy it. Moreover, the reward for the sect contribution points was not low. Only a fool would not accept it. Therefore, the lower house's bounty pavilion was almost overcrowded with people who accepted the mission. Fortunately, when Yun Chujo issued the mission, she specified the number of people and the limit of the number of people. Otherwise, the roof of the bounty pavilion would have been overturned. Soon, Yun Chujo received the Buddhist scriptures and other items that she had been longing for. A sinister smile immediately appeared on this guy's face. Drifters, your good days are coming to an end. Yun Chujo returned to the courtyard valiantly. She looked at the drifters who had gathered around her with contempt and then entered the house. A moment later, Yun Chujo walked out of the house wearing a kasaya and a Buddhist bead hanging around her neck. She knocked on the wooden fish in her hand and chanted Buddhist scriptures. Seeing this, the killing aura first stopped for a moment, then ran in all directions. The courtyard finally returned to its usual calm. Yun Chujo was very proud. Little girl, you still want to fight with me? I'll play you to death. The killing aura was most likely really frightened. It had not come to cause trouble for 2 days in a row. On the contrary, Dog 2 was not used to it. Little fairy, why do I feel empty after these drifters disappeared? Dog 2 said with some melancholy. Yun Chujo glanced at him. Because you're cheap. But Face said, Little fairy, you're so bad. How can you flirt with a baby? Yun Chujo, just as Yun Chujo was about to deal with Butt Face, clusters of red mist drifted into the yard stealthily. Yun Chujo sneered. You guys really don't remember. As she spoke, she took out the wooden fish and began to recite the scriptures. As expected, the murderous aura floated out of the courtyard. Unfortunately, before Yun Chujo could be happy, it floated back again. Yun Chujo had no choice but to recite the scriptures again. The drifters ran away again. When she stopped, the drifters floated back again. In the end, Hei Xinjia's throat was almost smoking, but she could not drive away the murderous aura completely. The murderous aura was deliberately jumping around in front of Yun Chujo. It was obviously meant to anger her. Yun Chujo was so angry that she was about to explode. Suddenly, she had an idea. She went into the room and fiddled with it for a while, then placed a few recording stones on the stone table. The sound of Yun Chujo chanting was coming from inside. Chapter 3964, Practicing the Sword with the Drifter. This move of Yun Chujius was clearly visible. The continuous chanting immediately caused the murderous aura to roll out of the courtyard impatiently and never return. Yun Chujo placed her hands on her waist and sneered, Even Wu Yun is not my match. You drifters still want to fight with me? I'll play you to death. However, Yun Chujo quickly realized the problem. Although the chanting could drive away the murderous aura, it was too annoying to keep it playing. Moreover, the murderous aura was very good at exploiting loopholes. Once Yun Chujo put away the recording stones, the murderous aura would sneak in and jump around. After a few times, Hei Xinjiu was terrified. She comforted herself. Anyway, she would not stay in the Nameless Sword sect for a long time. When she left the Nameless Sword sect, the drifters would naturally not follow her. Now, she would just let it be. If she had this kind of kung fu, she might as well practice her sword skills. When the killing aura saw that Yun Chujo was unexpectedly not playing with them anymore, it was instantly unhappy. Thus, when Yun Chujo was practicing her sword, they would jump up and down to cause trouble. When Yun Chujo saw this, she simply treated these drifters as imaginary enemies. Of course, they were not imaginary enemies. They were simply enemies, okay? Although Yun Chujia's sword technique was not bad, it was not as fast as those drifters. Moreover, even if she stabbed them, the damage to them would be extremely limited. Seeing this, the murderous aura became even more joyful. In Yun Chujia's eyes, they were mocking her swordsmanship for being too poor. Yun Chujia's ruthlessness was on the rise. Every day, other than eating, sleeping, and necessary going out, she would use these drifters to practice her swordsmanship. What made her so angry was that after she practiced her swordsmanship with all her might, not only did she not do anything to these drifters, but more and more of them drifted into her courtyard. Fuck. She could not live like this anymore. On this day, Yun Chujo was practicing her sword with the drifters when the drifters suddenly disappeared. Yun Chujo knew that there was an 80% chance that someone had come to visit her. Sure enough, when she opened the courtyard door, she saw that Zhao Hui had arrived. The withered branches and leaves in Yun Chujia's courtyard had all been burned by her. Now, there was nothing in the courtyard except for a swing and a stone table. It was quite refreshing. Zhao Hui smiled and said, "Junior sister Yun, I wanted to send you a message, but I came to find you for no reason." "I didn't disturb you, did I?" Yun Chujo smiled and said, "Senior brother Zhao, you're too polite. What's the matter?" "The monthly competition of the inner sect will be held in 2 days. What's your plan, junior sister Yun? Do you want to break the ranking?" Zhao Hui sat down and said. After hearing Zhao Hu's words, Yun Chujo remembered that the inner sect had a competition every month. All inner sect disciples could participate in the competition. However, the format of the competition was a bit special. The inner sect had a clear sky ranking. According to the spiritual power level and the previous competition results, the low-ranked disciples could challenge the high-ranked disciples, and they had to accept the challenge. If the 10th-ranked disciple successfully challenged the 8th-ranked disciple, then the positions of the 2 disciples would be switched, and so on. The monthly inner sect competition was also the most lively time in the inner sect. Everyone was talking about which one of the top-ranked disciples had been defeated, or that someone had successfully challenged someone. Yun Chujo had been competing with those drifters recently, so she was not very interested in the clear sky role. She said casually, "I'm not interested in the clear sky role. Why does senior brother Zhao want to try it?" Chapter 3965, What's my rank? Zhao Hui smiled and said, "I want to try. Although there are many old disciples in the inner sect and my rank is above 3,000, it's still a kind of motivation to advance a few places." Hearing Zhao Hu's words, Yun Chujo suddenly remembered something and asked curiously, "Senior brother Zhao, I really didn't pay attention to this so-called proclamation of Azure Sky. Well, what's my rank?" Zhao Hu's face slightly stiffened. He coughed dryly and said, "Junior sister Yun, your ranking is about the same as mine. I'm ranked 3,251, and you're ranked 3,289. Yun Chujo nodded and asked again, "Then how many inner sect disciples are there?" Zhao Hu's face stiffened even more. He paused for a moment before saying, 3,289. Yun Chujo nodded and then thought, A total of 3,289? This fellow slammed the stone table. What? Then wouldn't I be in last place? Zhao Hui thought to himself, you only know that now. Otherwise, why would he come over and invite her to break through the ranking together? He wanted her to get out of the awkward position of being in last place as soon as possible. Zhao Hui originally thought that after Yun Chujo found out that she was in last place, she would definitely break through the ranking. However, Yun Chujo said, so be it. There's no difference between second and last place. In any case, she's not in first place. Zhao Hui, there's a big difference now, okay? Junior sister Yun, you might not know this, but the ranking on the Proclamation of Azure Sky is not as simple as it sounds. It's also related to the sect missions and some trial missions. If you're ranked lower, you'll lose a lot of opportunities. The inner sect disciples ranked in the top 10 have a higher chance of being accepted as true disciples by the elders. Therefore, the competition for the top 10 positions on the Proclamation of Azure Sky has always been very intense. Also, if you continue to be ranked at the bottom, there's a high chance that you'll be eliminated to the outer sect during the annual assessment. Therefore, you'd better rush the ranking. However, you can't use any external forces to rush the ranking. You can just pick some disciples who are ranked lower and challenge them. Yun Chujo frowned. It was so troublesome. Then, she would go and take a look first. Even if she didn't challenge the ranking this time, it would still be good to see the tricks behind it. Therefore, Yun Chuzhou said to Zhao Hui, "Then, I will go and take a look at it. At least I can help you cheer for them." The two of them chatted for a while more before Zhao Hui stood up and left. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. The monthly competition of the inner sect began. When Yun Chuzhou arrived at the square of the middle courtyard, she saw that there were already 3 competition stages set up in the square, and some of the competition stages had already started. Yun Chuzhou could not help but feel a little puzzled. There were more than 3,000 disciples in the inner sect, and there were only 3 competition stages here. Wouldn't the competition last for a few days? However, she soon realized that not everyone could enter the competition stage. Those who participated in the challenge had to pay a certain amount of sect contribution points. Otherwise, they would not be qualified to challenge. Moreover, those who wanted to challenge the disciples ranked higher on the proclamation of Azure Sky would have to pay more sect contribution points. Therefore, those who did not have absolute confidence in winning would not easily challenge them. Just as Yun Chuzhou was looking around curiously, Zhao Hui squeezed out from the crowd. He said somewhat excitedly, "Junior sister Yun, the strength of this inner sect disciple is indeed much higher than that of the outer sect. I just watched a challenge of more than 2,000 people and felt that I benefited a lot." As soon as Zhao Hu's words fell, a few ear-piercing laughter rang out. One of the male ducks mockingly said, "Where did this fool come from? Isn't this nonsense? If an inner sect disciple is weaker than an outer sect disciple, how can he be called an inner sect?" You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.